Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori, and today I'm going to share with you my top 10 books of 2020. For those of you who are wondering where my Oathbringer vlog is, don't worry, it is coming. I know you guys have been asking about it. I'm in the middle of filming. It's a 1,300 page book, guys. Give me a break, okay? Like, it's 2020 and it's Oathbringer and I have 3 kids, so I'm working on it. Since it's gonna take me until the end of December, probably, to finish Oathbringer, I figured I would jump on and do my top 10 books of 2020 now and share with you guys some of my absolute favorite reads from this year. I have currently read 62 books in 2020, which isn't the 100 that I was hoping for, but I'm still pretty proud of the fact that I've read 62 books in 2020. Like, whatever amount of books that you've read, you read books. Okay, I'm gonna run down the list. These are in no particular order because there is absolutely no way that I could actually rank these books. I think maybe, could I rank these books? No, I'm not gonna rank these books because they're all so amazing, and I would love to hear in the comments what your top book or 5 books or 10 books of 2020 are. First 2 books on my list are actually memoirs that I read this year. I've really got a very deep love of memoirs and reading other people's stories, especially stories that are really uplifting, even if there's somebody who's been through a really hard time. The first book that I'm going to talk about is Finding Me by Michelle Knight. Now, I'm going to give a warning on this book. If you have a hard time reading books with any kind of content that is graphic in nature and has to do with some abuse, this is definitely a book that I would not recommend for you because it is very heavy. However, Michelle Knight is one of my heroes in life because she's an incredible woman. She has been through some of the worst things imaginable, and she is one of the most joyful, beautiful souls I think I have ever had the pleasure of being introduced to on the internet. So I wanted to read her memoir. She was one of the 3 women who was kidnapped and held against their will in a house in Ohio. And they were there for, well, she was there for 11 years and was finally able to escape. She is now a huge beacon of light in her community and for a lot of different organizations and helping other people that have been through similar things as she has. And she's just an incredible woman, and I just have the utmost respect for her. The second memoir that I read this year that was an incredibly impactful read is The Girl with 7 Names. So Hanso Lee is a North Korean defector who escaped, and her whole journey of growing up in North Korea and giving us some insight into what that's actually like and what she had to overcome and how she's trying to adjust to life outside of North Korea, get back in touch with her family. This is a book that honestly I feel like is a must read for anybody who's even remotely interested in memoirs. Read this book because it's really, really sobering, and this was another one of those memoirs that I could tell was really good because it was just something I felt privileged to read. This is a really fun little book that I put in this list just because it gave me so much joy this year, and that is Snug by Katana Chetwynd. She is a comic artist, and she put together this adorable little collection of comics about, as she calls it, dating your best friend. These, for somebody who's married or is in a relationship, these are so relatable. It's ridiculous, and they're just the cutest things ever, and they were just really good little uplifters during the day whenever I needed a smile, and I hope she comes out with another collection of these because I will be the first in line to buy it. Okay, now let's talk about some fiction books. This is a book that's super short, and it actually shocked me how much I really enjoyed it because it isn't the type of book that I would typically say, wow, this is one of my favorite books. That is Out of the Silent Planet by C.S. Lewis. It's a tiny little thing that I read for my friend's book club, and it's just so interesting. I don't even know if I could describe to you what exactly it's about, but the world that C.S. Lewis creates here is just so rich and interesting and colorful and really makes you think, and there's a lot of philosophy woven into the story, but it's not heavy-handed. It's actually really just interesting and asks questions that, as you're going through the story, it really makes you think about the characters, about the situation they're in, and the choices they're making, and of course is thrown in with some of C.S. Lewis's favorite creature characters that he is always so good at. And yeah, I just found this book to be really fun to read, and I highly recommend it if you need something very light, fantasy-esque to read that might be a little bit kind of interesting to take a peek at. I can't talk today. Out of the Silent Planet was a very good book. You should read it. Next up on my list is Lost Boy by Christina Henry. She writes dark, twisted retellings of commonly known fairy tales, and this is the story of Peter Pan with a heavy twist in which Captain Hook, as a boy, Jamie, is our protagonist. And oh my goodness, when the little thing on the top of the book says you will never look at Peter Pan the same way again, they are not kidding, because this book totally stole my heart, blew my mind. It was amazing. It's a little dark. Like, at first I thought this was going to be a middle grade level book. It is definitely YA, but it's so interesting, and the characters in this book were done so well. Jamie, hands down, was my favorite character in here, and she just tells this story in such a new, fresh way, using some of the characters that we all know and love in a place that we all know and love, and this just was an incredible read. Okay, now we're getting into the bigger fantasy books that I read this year, and my absolute top favorites. And Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Ames was one of the first ones I pulled off the shelf. This is a book that was inspired by like 80s rock bands put into a like everything you could want fantasy pot. And I absolutely loved it. It's a book that does not take itself seriously, but at the same time, it tells an incredibly good story. The characters are amazing. It is a riot to read. It is so much fun. And if you are a fantasy buff and you want to read something that's kind of a fun break from maybe some of the heavier fantasy books, I cannot recommend this book highly enough. It's hilarious. It's soul-crushing all within the same moment. It's incredible. So definitely Kings of the Wild was a big favorite for the year. Okay, Brandon Sanderson made this list with 2 books, which probably doesn't surprise anyone, especially since I have been reading a ton of Brandon Sanderson this year. I hands down read him the most of any author, and this book, Legion, you can see my note tabs in this book. Stephen Leeds is a kind of savant, brilliant man who solves cases, and people come to him with things kind of like a Sherlock-esque sort of situation, but he has something close to schizophrenia, and he talks to all of his hallucinations, and they're all characters, and this book just was so good, and I don't even know how to describe exactly how much it meant to me to read a character this relatable, as somebody with a mental health disorder that is somewhat similar to some of the things that Stephen Leeds experiences. Just wow, this book, I was really impressed with how Sanderson handled mental health in this book and how respectful and accurate he was to a lot of just daily life things. So I really appreciated that, and this hands down is probably in my top 2 or 3 books for the year. The second Brandon Sanderson book that I read this year, and we'll see if Oathbringer manages to topple it off its throne, but I'm kind of doubting it just because the amount of emotions that I went through reading this book are kind of off the charts. Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. Hands down better than Way of Kings. I really enjoyed Way of Kings, don't get me wrong, but this book was so good. And for those of you that have read it, you know what I'm talking about when I say the emotional roller coaster of Words of Radiance is unlike anything I have ever read, specifically with Sanderson, but honestly, the only other fantasy author I can see coming close to this was the emotional roller coaster that I had reading Dead House Gates by Steven Erikson, the characters, the way that Sanderson writes these books, just, we don't need to talk about it. You all know, okay? We know. At this point, who doesn't know that Sanderson is a total master of epic fantasy? And yeah, it was a good book. What can I say? Okay, and the last book on my list is probably, like, if I absolutely had to choose a favorite, which I really don't want to do because I don't like to do that. I love all these books, but if I had to choose a favorite book that I read this year, just based on how much I enjoyed it and how well written it was and how interesting it was, I would pick several of these books. However, one of the first ones on that list would be The Lies of Lockemora by Scott Lynch. This book follows a young man named Locke in a kind of Spanish-inspired fantasy world, and he is being trained as a young boy to be a con artist. And this book, he's a brilliant protagonist because he's one of those characters that, like, seems like a total brilliant genius, but things don't always go his way, which is something I really, really appreciate, because a lot of times characters like that just kind of get a free pass through a lot of their story. Locke definitely does not, and he has a sidekick best friend, Jean or Jean or Jean. I've heard it pronounced pretty much every possible way imaginable for a 4-letter name. Jean is what I'm going to call him. Jean Tannen is his best friend and kind of bodyguard, and honestly his parent half the time. And the two of them are probably my favorite platonic relationship in all of fantasy. I love them so much. They're adorable and they're just so brotherly, and it's a beautiful thing. So yes, Lies of Lockemora, if you haven't read this book and you're a fantasy fan, go get it, because this book is amazing and I absolutely adored it. Okay, those are my top 10 books of 2020. Please let me know in the comments what your top 10 books of 2020 are, and I will respond, because I do that. So, I hope you guys are all doing well. The Oathbringer vlog is coming, I promise. I'm working on it. It's a long book. But I am enjoying Oathbringer so far, and yes. So I hope that everyone is staying happy and healthy in whatever way you can. And yeah, I will see you all in the next video.